Welcome back to the deep dive. Tonight, I really want you to picture something with me.
Oh, setting the scene right away. I like it.
Yeah, I think we need the right vibe for this one. Imagine it's late. The world outside is quiet, maybe, a little too quiet.
Right.
You've got a fire crackling in the hearth, or maybe just a really good digital fireplace on your laptop screen. And you've poured yourself a glass of something nice. You are settling in, not just for a chat, but for a real journey into the unknown.
We are definitely going for a vibe that is relaxed, a little bit spooky, but ultimately very cozy.
Exactly, because it's the perfect setting for the material we have on the desk tonight.
It really is. We aren't looking at spreadsheets or, market trends this time. We're looking at the nature of reality itself.
Right. And we spend so much time these days scrolling through Instagram or TikTok for life advice. You know the exact type, those 15-second clips telling you to manifest your destiny or
drink more green juice.
yeah, drink your greens and everything will be fine.
It is often very surface level stuff, like a quick dopamine hit of motivation that fades in 10 minutes.
Which is fine, but tonight we are getting our life advice from a slightly different source. We are going way back to August 7, 1967.
A very specific date.
We are getting advice from a disembodied entity speaking through a medium in Elmira, New York. And honestly, it might be some of the most practical, tough love advice I've ever heard.
It is genuinely fascinating how grounded it is. To set the stage specifically, we are looking at session 359 of the early sessions, book 8 of the Seth Material.
And for those who might be new to this, Seth is the personality, the energy essence that spoke through the author Jane Roberts. In the source material, Seth refers to Jane as Ruburt and her husband Robert Butts as Joseph.
Right. But on this specific night in 1967, the room was a bit more crowded than usual.
It was a full house. We have the core duo, Jane and Robert, but we also have 3 guests who are actually siblings.
Yes, there's Pete Murtaugh, who is the young one, a teenager at the time. Okay. There's Stephen, his older brother, who is, well, about to get significantly roasted by an interdimensional being.
Oh, he really is.
And then there's Julie, their sister.
And the dynamic is really interesting because they aren't just observing, they are actively asking for guidance. And Seth absolutely delivers. So what is our mission tonight? What are we trying to pull out of this session?
Our goal is to explore how psychic development intersects with personal responsibility. We are going to look at the psychology of what I call impossible goals, why we set ourselves up to fail, and we will touch on the fluid nature of the future.
Awesome.
But before we go any further, I do need to make our standard disclaimer.
Go for it.
This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We're acting strictly as unbiased reporters of the text provided in the session. We aren't here to endorse specific metaphysical claims, but rather to analyze the psychological and philosophical insights contained within the source material.
Perfect. So let's map this out for you. We've got 4 main segments tonight. First, we're going to talk about Pete and the trap of psychic shortcuts. If you think being psychic is a cheat code for life, you might need to think again.
Then we move to the heavy hitter, the jockey syndrome. This is the advice given to Stephen, and it is honestly a masterclass in psychology.
After that, we'll discuss Julie, or as Seth calls her, the high apple pie in the sky girl.
That's such a great nickname.
It really is. We'll look at probabilities and how the future actually works. And finally, we will wrap up with one of the most charming interactions in the entire Seth Material, the cool head sign-off.
I love that part.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with Pete.
So Pete is the younger brother. And earlier in the sessions, context clues tell us this, Pete has indicated he has some sort of psychic ability. He's been trying to communicate with an entity he calls Ferd.
Ferd.
Yeah, Ferd. Not exactly the most mystical name, is it? It sounds like a guy who works at a hardware store. Like, yeah, go see Ferd in aisle 4. He'll sort out your plumbing.
It does lack a certain gravitas when you kind of expect names like Zarathustra or the Ancient One. But Ferd is who Pete is connected with. And Pete is clearly excited. He's young, he feels this connection, and he wants to know how to use it.
Right.
And here is where Seth steps in with a warning that I think applies to anyone trying to develop a skill, spiritual or otherwise.
Seth basically tells him, do not use this to cheat.
Precisely. There is a specific quote from the session that is crucial here. Seth says, psychic development should lead to overall personality development. It should not be used in order to make things easier in physical terms, though I understand indeed that this is a temptation.
That is such a huge distinction because I think if you asked most people, hey, if you could be psychic, what would you do? They'd say, I'd pick the winning lottery numbers or I'd see if my boss is going to fire me.
Exactly. They view it as a tool for leverage, a way to just bypass the struggle.
But Seth is arguing that true psychic development is actually a burden of growth. If you use it just to smooth out the bumps in the road, you are missing the entire point.
It's like, okay, imagine you're trying to get in shape. You want to build muscle, you go to the gym every day, lift the heavy weights, eat right, and struggle through the soreness. Or you could take a bunch of steroids.
The steroids might give you the physical appearance, the result, faster. But you haven't developed the discipline, the internal structure, or the true health to sustain it. In fact, you might be actively damaging yourself.
Exactly. Seth is saying that if you focus on the physical benefits, the predictions, the easy wins, you actually block the spiritual development. You're taking the shortcut, but the shortcut leads to a dead end.
And he emphasizes that the person involved must then demand more of himself. It's not about doing less work, it's about doing more internal work.
It's funny because in a way, Seth is arguably the ultimate anti-guru here. Most gurus sell you the secret to easy success. Seth is saying, oh, you want powers, great. Now get ready to work twice as hard on your character.
Which is probably not what a teenage boy wants to hear. Pete is probably thinking, I just want to know if the cute girl at school likes me, and Seth is giving him a lecture on character development.
Probably. And speaking of things Pete wants to know, we have to talk about Ferd again. Because Pete, being a teenager, cannot resist asking the big question. He asks Seth, do you know any more about Ferd? Have you been in contact with him?
This is a moment where the personality of Seth really shines through. You have to remember, Seth speaks with a lot of authority. He's not mean, but he does not suffer fools gladly. And his response to Pete regarding Ferd is just, well, it's a very polite burn.
It is an absolute roasting delivered with white gloves.
Seth says, I have not been in contact with him. We are on different levels, you see.
Different levels. That is polite, diplomatic code for I am in the penthouse of consciousness discussing the fabric of space-time, and your friend Ferd is hanging out in the basement playing checkers.
I laughed out loud reading that. It's so subtle. It's like when a celebrity is asked about a D-list reality star and they say, oh, I'm not familiar with their work.
Exactly. But there is a deeper lesson there, too. Pete suggests a joint session later with Seth and Ferd together. He wants a party line. And Seth is very gracious. He says maybe later. But he warns Pete not to obsess over it.
Right. He tells Pete not to look for tingles or physical signs constantly. Let me pull that up. He says, do not expect too much too soon. This is your greatest assurance of fully developing your abilities.
Which is totally counterintuitive today.
Yeah.
We live in a world of instant gratification. If I meditate for 10 minutes, I want to feel divin immediately. If I practice intuition, I want to guess the coin flip correctly 10 times in a row right now.
And Seth is just saying, relax.
Yes. That is the relaxed vibe we are aiming for tonight. Don't force the magic. Let it happen. If you chase the butterfly, it flies away. If you sit still, it lands on your shoulder.
That creates a really nice contrast to what happens next, because while Seth is gentle with Pete, treating him like the enthusiastic student he is, he turns his attention to the older brother, Stephen, and the tone shifts dramatically.
Oh boy, does it shift. We're entering the roast of Stephen.
Roast might be a strong word, but it is certainly tough love. It feels like universal dad advice, you know? Like your dad sitting you down at the kitchen table because he found your report card. But instead of your dad, it's an energy essence speaking from the astral plane.
Seth even acknowledges this. He says at one point, now if I sound like the old man from the mountain, so must it be. He knows he is being stern, but he insists it is absolutely necessary because Stephen is stuck.
So let's look at the complaints. What is Stephen actually doing wrong? Because at first glance, he just seems like a guy trying to figure things out.
Well, first we have to talk about the physical vessel, the body. Seth starts by calling out Stephen's diet, and he gets very specific.
He really does. He tells Stephen he's not eating evenly. He says there's an over-reliance upon one type of food, and he actually gives him a target weight. He says Stephen needs to be at 138 to 140 pounds minimum.
Which heavily implies Stephen is likely underweight and skipping meals. Now, Stephen has apparently been complaining about some symptoms. He has eye issues. He has these tingling sensations in his body.
Right, tingling. Like the psychic tingles Pete was looking for.
Exactly. And that is the irony. Stephen might think these physical sensations are something mystical. Or maybe he's a hypochondriac thinking he has a rare disease. Or he thinks it's just stress manifesting.
But Seth cuts right through it.
Right through it. He says the eye symptoms are connected with the weight deficiencies. The tingling symptoms are also.
In other words, You aren't having a spiritual awakening, Stephen. You aren't cursed. You need a sandwich. You just have a vitamin deficiency.
It's a really powerful reminder that we are biological machines first. Seth explains that you cannot make clear decisions whether they are spiritual or practical if your body is crying out for nutrients. He says you are driving it too hard. You must listen to its voice.
I think a lot of us ignore that. We try to fix our anxiety or our indecision with mindfulness apps or therapy, which are great, or we look for external signs. But sometimes the problem is just biology. You're hangry, you're sleep deprived.
It grounds the metaphysical work completely. You can't fly in the astral plane if your runway, your body, is full of
Yep.
potholes.
Yep.
You need stability.
But the diet advice is just the warm-up.
Yeah, here we go.
The real core of this session, and frankly the most mind-blowing part for me, is the discussion about Stephen's career.
The jockey dream.
The jockey dream. Stephen wants to be a horse jockey.
Which, for a grown man who isn't already immersed in that world, is a pretty specific and incredibly difficult goal.
Extremely difficult. It requires a specific body type, years of intense training connections. It's not something you just wake up and decide to do in your mid-20s. And Seth shuts it down. He doesn't say maybe or keep trying. He says, subconsciously, you do not want to be a jockey.
That has to be shocking to hear. Imagine you tell your mentor your biggest dream, and they just say, no, you don't actually want that. Stephen probably felt super defensive. What do you mean? I think about it all the time.
But Seth explains why Stephen picked this goal. And this is the part that gave me goosebumps. This is the part that I think everyone listening needs to really hear and digest.
Seth argues that Stephen chose this goal specifically because it is nearly impossible.
Let's listen to the quote on this because it's heavy. Seth says, you have chosen that goal because it does seem so difficult. And if you fail, then you can blame circumstances rather than yourself.
That is a profound psychological insight. It is the fear of failure entirely disguised as ambition.
Unpack that for us a bit. How does that actually work? Because usually we're told to shoot for the moon, right? We're told that having big, impossible dreams is a virtue.
It can be a virtue if you are actually working toward them. But here, Seth is identifying a mechanism of self-protection.
Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say you set a goal to, I don't know, learn to bake a decent loaf of sourdough bread in the next month.
Okay, seems doable.
It is doable. It's hard, but doable. Now, let's say a month goes by and your bread is a brick. It's totally inedible. You failed. Whose fault is it? It's mine. I didn't follow the recipe, or I didn't practice enough.
Exactly. You have to look in the mirror and say, I wasn't good enough at this task. That hurts. That actually damages the ego. It's a direct reflection of your effort and ability on a level playing field.
Okay, I see where you're going. It's vulnerable.
But what if you decide your goal is to be the starting center for the Los Angeles Lakers?
Well, I'm 5'10" and I have bad knees, so that's definitely not happening.
Right. But if you tell everyone, my dream is to play for the Lakers, and you spend years trying to get scouted, and you inevitably fail.
Well, then I can just say, oh, the industry's too tough, or I didn't have the genetics, or the coaches are biased.
Precisely. You get to keep your ego completely intact. You get to be the tragic hero who fought against impossible odds, rather than the person who just didn't do the work on a manageable everyday task.
That is, oof, that hits close to home. I feel like we see this a lot. People who talk about writing the great American novel, but they never even write a short story. Or people who want to be billionaire CEOs, but won't take a basic management course or start a small side hustle.
It is a defense mechanism, is the jockey syndrome. Seth tells Stephen, if a goal is attainable and you fail to attain it, you see, then you feel you would have to blame yourself. And again, you do not want to accept the consequences of your own action.
So you're saying that by picking an impossible goal, Stephen is actually being lazy or cowardly.
Cowardly is a harsh word, but Seth implies he's afraid of testing himself. He's hiding behind the impossibility. As long as the goal is out of reach, he never really has to prove his worth. He can live in the fantasy of what if, rather than the reality of what is.
So what is the antidote then? What does Seth tell him to do? Because you can't just crush a guy's dream and leave him sitting there.
He tells him to pick an attainable goal, to test himself against reality. He says you do not have to be afraid of testing yourself against attainable goals. It's about building genuine confidence through actual small wins rather than dreaming of a giant win that will frankly never happen.
It's tough love, but it's empowering. Because Seth also says, no one owes you anything, but you owe everything to yourself.
That is a mantra for life. It strips away all the victimhood. Stephen apparently has a tendency to blame others for his defeats. Seth calls him impetuous and says he lashes out.
Yeah, he says, lose any bitterness that you may have toward others, for this bitterness is holding you back. It's basically stop looking at what the world didn't give you and start looking at what you are refusing to give yourself.
And he connects it back to the present moment. He warns Stephen not to be a slave to hopes for the future. If you don't enjoy today, you won't enjoy the future, even if you do get what you want.
That is such a common trap. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I lose 10 pounds.
And Seth says, no. If you cannot find satisfaction in the process, you won't find it in the result, because you take yourself with you to the finish line. If you are a bitter, vitamin-deficient person when you cross the finish line, you'll just be a bitter, vitamin-deficient winner.
Which is a perfect segue, actually, because while Stephen is stuck in a loop about the future and his impossible dream, the third sibling, Julie, is apparently looking at the future in a totally different way.
Ah, yes. Julie.
Or as Seth calls her, the high apple pie in the sky girl.
It is such a delightful phrase. It paints such a clear picture of her energy. Optimistic, maybe a bit airy, always looking up.
It really does. It sounds like something straight out of a 1940s musical. She's a high apple pie in the sky girl. So we are moving into the third section now. What does Seth have for Julie?
Well, first he validates her role in the family. He calls her nature open and affectionate, though he notes she can be impatient. She's the glue holding these brothers together. She's likely the one who dragged them to this session in the first place.
But she's also curious about her own path. And Seth starts dropping some predictions. Now, usually when we hear predictions in these old sessions, I get a little skeptical. You know, you'll meet a tall, dark stranger. It feels like a newspaper horoscope.
It can definitely feel that way.
Yeah.
But this is where we get into the mechanics of how Seth views the future. He doesn't give a fixed, etched-in-stone prophecy. He talks about probabilities. He views the future not as a single track, but as a vast field of potential.
He mentions a job change for her. He says perhaps within an 8-month period, there may be a Denver connection.
And then he gets even more specific, but also vague at the same time. He says a Denver connection, or a man's named Dan, or the man will have a connection with Denver.
Dan from Denver. It sounds like a rom-com. Coming this fall, Julie meets Dan from Denver.
It really does. But notice the phrasing here. He says, this is a probability and not a frozen future, however. This is crucial to the Seth Material's entire philosophy. The future isn't a movie reel that's already been filmed and we're just sitting in the theater watching it play out.
It's more like a weather forecast.
That is a great analogy. A weather forecast looks at the current pressure systems, the energy, and says it is 90% likely to rain. But the wind could change. A low-pressure system could shift unexpectedly. Seth explains that sometimes psychic forces rush toward one direction.
Let me read that part. He says, on some occasions, the totality of probabilities all point in one main direction. These tend to form a more or less definite future. Even this, however, can be altered.
So for Julie, he sees a serious romance likely in 2 years, maybe marriage. But he heavily emphasizes that it depends on her actions, her choices. It is completely interactive. If she decides to move to Alaska instead of following the Denver connection, the probability changes.
I really like that. It puts the power back in your hands. It's not fate will happen to you. It's this is where the current is taking you. Do you want to swim with it or against it?
Exactly. It removes the fatalism entirely. You aren't a puppet. You are a co-creator.
Speaking of co-creating, Seth addresses the family trio as a whole. Pete, Stephen, and Julie. They seem pretty tight-knit.
They are. Seth calls them a closely knit family, which has pros and cons. The pro is obvious support. The con is enmeshment, being way too emotionally involved in each other's drama.
He advises Julie specifically about Pete, the young psychic. He says, you are right in shielding your younger brother, but do not shield him too well.
This goes right back to the theme of independence. If you protect someone from every single bump in the road, they never learn how to drive. Pete needs to mature, and he needs to experience the world, not just be the baby brother constantly protected by the high apple pie sister.
It's interesting how all three siblings get advice that essentially centers on independence. Pete needs to not rely on psychic shortcuts. Stephen needs to not rely on impossible dreams or blaming the world. Julie needs to not rely on shielding her brother to feel useful.
Self-reliance is the absolute golden thread running through this whole session. Seth wants them to stand on their own 2 feet, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Okay, so we've gone through the really heavy stuff. We've had the warnings about Ferd, the roast of Stephen's jockey dreams, the probability analysis for Julie. The tape is running out. The session is winding down. And this leads us to our final segment, the cool head.
This is, without a doubt, one of my favorite moments in the archives. It completely changes the tone of the interaction.
Set the scene for us.
It's late. The energy in the room has been intense. Stephen just got told his life philosophy is completely wrong. Julie's been told about Dan from Denver. But now Pete, the teenager, gets to talk to Seth directly again. The tape has literally been flipped over.
And Pete, being a kid in 1967, and remember this is the summer of love era, decides to pay Seth a compliment. He looks at this ancient, wise entity and says, I really have enjoyed hearing you, Seth. I think you are a real cool head.
A real cool head.
Yeah.
It is such quintessential 60s slang. It basically means you're a cool guy or you've really got it together.
And Seth, does he get offended? Does he say, I am an eternal consciousness, show some respect, puny mortal?
Not at all. He accepts it with total grace. He replies, I am indeed pleased to hear that I am a cool head.
I love that. I am indeed pleased. It's so formal, yet so warm. It shows that Seth isn't this scary, demon-like figure. He has a sense of humor. He completely understands the intent behind the words.
It humanizes the phenomenon so well. It reminds us that communication isn't just about vocabulary, it's about connection. Seth bridges the gap between his high level and Pete's cool head slang effortlessly.
And then Pete throws in another pop culture reference. He's talking about Seth looking in on them from the spirit world, and he jokes about the Red Baron and Snoopy.
He's referencing the Peanuts comic strip, of course. Snoopy imagining he's fighting the Red Baron. Pete says, the Red Baron and Snoopy, I think it's been great talking to you.
It reinforces that relaxed, chilling vibe we talked about at the very start. This wasn't a terrifying seance with tables shaking and lights flickering. It was a conversation, a chat between a family and a wise friend.
A wise friend who happens to be beyond physical death. But yes, the vibe is very comfortable.
Seth signs off by wishing them his warm affection, and that is where the session ends.
It leaves you with a profound feeling of capability. You aren't left feeling small. You're left feeling like, okay, I have work to do, but I can actually do it.
So let's bring this home. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. If we have to distill this down to the absolute nuggets of wisdom to take away, the things our listeners should write on a sticky note and put on their bathroom mirror, what are they?
I think there are four main pillars here. Number one, don't use spirituality or any shortcut to escape the physical work of living. You cannot hack your way to wisdom, whether it's psychic powers or just trying to get rich quick. If you bypass the character development, you lose.
Right, no steroids for the soul. You have to put in the reps.
Exactly. Number two, the Stephen lesson. Do not pick impossible goals just to protect your ego from failure. It is vastly better to fail at something real than to succeed at dreaming about something impossible.
That's the one that is really going to stick with me. The idea that we actively choose difficulty as a shield, that is going to haunt me next time I make a New Year's resolution.
Good. It really should. Number three, the future is probable, not frozen. You are writing the script in real time. Don't wait for Dan from Denver to save you. Go out and live your life.
And number four,
take care of the machine. Your physical health, your diet, your rest supports your mental and spiritual health. You can't have high-level thoughts on low-level fuel. If you're feeling tingles and visions, maybe check your vitamin levels first.
Simple, but essential. Now, before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought. A little homework, if you will.
We always like a little homework.
I want you to look at the goals you have right now, the big ones. And I want you to honestly ask yourself, are you chasing a jockey dream? Are you chasing something so impossibly out of reach that you have a built-in excuse to never really try?
Or are you brave enough to pick a goal you might actually reach and risk the pain of failing at it? Because that is where the growth actually is.
That is the question. Now, we have to give credit where credit is due. This incredible material comes from the Seth Material, specifically the Early Sessions, Book 8.
And we highly encourage you to go to the source. We are just scratching the surface here. These books are dense, they're funny, and they are life-changing. You should visit sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
That is sethcenter.com/the early sessions. Support the publisher, New Awareness Network, read the full sessions yourself. There is so much more context we just couldn't fit in.
Indeed. It is a library truly worth getting lost in.
Thank you for hanging out with us by the fire tonight. We hope this deep dive gave you something to chew on. Until next time.
Keep your head cool.
And have a good night.